I have most months a meeting booked in here for any current interesting topic that kicks up. We had one about Palestine, we had another one about Israel's nuclear weapons alongside the CND. We had a couple of meetings of Headingley against the cuts in run-up to the big march on the 26th of March. We've had another couple of meetings on other topics. There's 12 meetings here a year, but we don't always get a meeting in. I was down at the Occupation chatting away, ran into Gay, and ran to a few other people, and I said, I'll put on a meeting for you. And I want to keep it as informal as possible. We've got two people, Rhiannon, whose surname I don't know, and Gay Bennett, who's lived in Headingley for years, who's visited more than one of the occupations in the country. And just to show you the scope of what's happening, there was a meeting down at the Cervantes Centre just last week, which is the Spanish language school, and they had a meeting on the, I can't pronounce, Indignados, which when my wife went there, she came back and told me about it, and they had someone from the Greek movement as well, and it seemed to be similar to what's happening in this country. Or it's not just a UK current or a Spanish or a Greek current, it's an American current. It seems to be all over the place. I was watching a dance of the tents on YouTube as I left my house. This was, they've been told to move on, so they all appeared having cut the tops of the tents off with holes at the bottom. We were wearing like skirts, dancing in ballet formation around this park in Melbourne, with the police trying to figure out, are they camping, are they camping, are they dancing, what on earth is going on? I was watching this, it was hilarious. And then they were all running around with their arms out like this and pirouetting. It was amazing. I thought, unbelievable. And YouTube, which is what Claire is doing, is an excellent medium for watching anything. So I just emailed my friend about how to make a cider press out of a hijack, and there's about 20 ways of doing it on YouTube. But for us, and what we're interested in, there's plenty of scope for that. Now, I don't know which order you two would like to talk.
I'll start.
So Gay's going to start.
Because we've got all generations here, and my name is Gay, this is Claire, and this is Rhiannon. And I'll just kick off with a few comments. It is certainly true that I have visited some other places in Leeds. I was not long after it all started at St Paul's. I didn't go there to camp. I walked into a nearby youth hospital, and I visited St Paul's and nearby Finsbury Square, and I went with a group of them to Canary Wharf, where we were lectured by two bankers. And there were many activities going on in St Paul's, and I took part in those throughout the day I was there. It really was quite interesting. Anyway, as soon as I got back to Leeds, nothing much was happening here, so I thought I would visit one or two other places. And I went down to Birmingham, which had its problems, and in fact all encampments have their own problems, which we might talk about a little later. I went to Nottingham, one of the most flourishing ones going. I went to Sheffield, that's a good one, and I also went to Bradford before it was sort of swept away by council edict. And then not long after that, on the 11th of November, we started with Leeds Occupy, which was a great pleasure to me. The interesting thing about the camps, I find, and staying in the camps and going down there and chatting to people, is you meet so many different kinds of people. And I had quite an interesting time about 10 days ago. I was sitting in the tea tent with the cooking and the office and the various lounge chairs, which are sort of decrepit kitchen chairs and garden chairs, and somebody arrived, and she'd come over from Todmorden to ask about the Occupy movement, because she was organising a debate on the Occupy with her Todmorden U3A, that's the University of the Third Age, and she'd been sort of commissioned to come over and make inquiries, and she wanted me to answer one or two questions. The first question was, why are you called anti-capitalists? So I said, well, perhaps we aren't always called anti-capitalists, and perhaps people wouldn't wish to be anti-things so much as in favour of positive things. We got over that little hump, and we then went on to a sort of discussion of some of the things she was particularly interested in. And I later had a long email from her about how the discussion had gone in her World Affairs meeting on that Wednesday, which was smaller than usual because of the strike. But people had debated a whole lot of topics, and I might just refer quickly to some of the things which particularly interested them. I mean, she believes that corporations and politicians will be moved if people start resisting and objecting to what they do. And she says that change is inevitably happening at the moment, and that's partly because of climate change and unemployment and the financial crisis. Her group also feels that the Occupy movement is just the tip of an iceberg, under which there is a huge block of unease across all groups, although people come to problems from different directions. They went on, as it was an older group, to talking about the problems of old age, and they were particularly worried by the fact that pension promises may not be fulfilled as a result of financial troubles. But she said that people didn't seem to be upset by health services being taken over by private companies, which I felt, that, for instance, here, Leeds Hospital Alert is fairly concerned about that, in Tottenham possibly not. Then they discussed something about how there could be good banking and bad banking. And so could there be good capitalism and bad capitalism? But she did feel that she summed up in a final big paragraph about how the ideas for change, which are being promoted by the Occupy movement and other groups, could be part of setting new priorities in a way that the establishment will be unable to ignore. Some people are already involved in alternative and transition economics, such as private food growing, in order to sidestep the big food retailers. We can't tell people not to be consumers, but we can provide alternatives and persuade by example so that people cease to fear the idea of not having things to make them happy. I then was quite interested in something slightly separate, which has quite a bearing on Occupy, and that was the day of alternative debates and lectures and discussions at the university recently under the title of Summit. And one of the speakers was the long-term activist and human rights organiser, Peter Tatchell. And he actually put forward half a dozen interesting ideas about how people could get together to try and ensure that the activities of companies and business could be a little bit more egalitarian. And this does slightly bear upon what we do here in Headingley, I have to say. One of his ideas was low-cost loans for employees to convert businesses into cooperatives. And of course, we have our own cooperative natural food store here, which is something in that line. He suggested bonuses for public and private sector staff who devise efficiency savings. And another idea of his that all large companies should have at least 1/3 of their boards made up of employees and consumer directors. Trade union administration of members' pension funds. And finally, the workforce to receive collective bonuses for increased publicity, for productivity. And that's only sort of a tiny drop in the ocean of the ideas which are sort of being thrown at me and which I've tried to sort of elicit from people during my time helping at the camp down in the city square and actually staying there overnight on 1 or 2 occasions. So it's a lovely place to discuss and learn down there, and I'm enjoying it greatly.
I wonder if it might be better if Rhiannon went before me. talking about more theoretical.
Yes, let's have something on the camp, Rhiannon.
Alright, you're probably wondering how I got involved in the Occupy movement. See, back in August, we are the 99% as a phrase was trending on the internet. Shortly after that, Wall Street got occupied. Thousands of people converged on Wall Street in protest of the fact that 1%, the highest earners in the world, own 40% of the planet's resources, and everyone else is left suffering, which we all know. So that's why it all started. And when it began, I was watching it just feverishly all the time. When London kicked off, I was really sad about the fact that I couldn't go there. So when we started out in Leeds, I was straight down there. And yeah, I've met loads of fascinating people, and I'm loving it. I found out something interesting today about the response that we're getting. There hasn't just been the police in America being violent. All over the place, sorry. The police have responded in the same way that they always respond to protest movements in trying to clamp it down. In America, they've tried to shut down the Wall Street group several times, and they've almost succeeded. We had the pepper spray incident, Occupy UC Berkeley in America, where a police officer blasted a line of students in the face with pepper spray from about 2 meters away. Really sad. And over here, apparently a few days ago, the police sent a private memo to various corporations in the City of London saying that we were a terrorist organisation on the same level as Al-Qaeda. So yeah, apparently sitting around in tents is akin to suicide bombing. So, you know, if you have a problem with being in the same room as a supposed terrorist, lynch me now, but make sure someone's there to feed the cat, because I don't want to starve. Basically, what we want to see is a complete overhaul to the system, so that we can actually thrive, and everyone's concerns are actually interlinked. The healthcare thing, the pension thing, it's all connected into the corruption of the corporate elites that are draining us of everything for their own greed and their own profit. And we want to see changes to make life just more fair for everyone, so that there isn't just a small group of people at the top with everything and everyone else starving to death. Because if things go on the way they are, with this system in free fall the way it is, they're not going to stop until everyone on the planet is dead. Let's face it. I'm sorry, I really wish I'd phoned better.
You don't have to. Could you tell us a little bit how the camp works on a day-to-day basis? Are you public coming by? What they talk about? Anything like that? Anything like that?
The public in Leeds have been really nice and receptive and positive towards us. It seems like 90% of the people are completely in agreement and in favour of us. And we keep having people saying to us, I'd come down here and camp and be here more often, but I can't because I have work or I have children or this, that and the other. So everyone who's either with us, helping us in some way, or has a very valid reason like poverty and no time, too much stress, to not be there and wishes they could be. So the thing is, this movement has scope to grow beyond the currently 2,600-ish camps in 86 countries that we have. It has the scope to grow even beyond that, because we are the 99% and we are everyone, and we're in this not just for ourselves, but for you and for the kids and the old people and everyone. I think that things are probably going to cool down a bit over the winter because, frankly, no one wants to die of hypothermia in a tent. But I do think that everything will just kick straight back in when the weather warms up in spring. So I'm thinking that what we're going to end up seeing now is everything calming down, a few of the camps disbanding a bit, you know, in all colder places, but the ones in hot places like California and in the southern hemisphere thriving. And the media are probably going to latch onto this and say, well, look here, the Occupy movement has failed just because things have quieted down a bit. But I think it's going to burst back up because, frankly, we can't lose. Not when we've come this far, not when we've endured this much, and not when we have this much support, there is no way we can fail. And we're already starting to see changes. David Cameron and Nick Clegg, basically Parliament have said that they're considering putting a limit on the amount that bankers can get in bonuses, because that's one of the things that everyone's protesting against. So there's a result straight off within a few months of us starting. At this rate, logically, we should be able to achieve everything that we want, because it's baby steps. That might not be much, but if you prolong the movement, because through peaceful, long-term, sustained protest, change can happen. Change does happen. We've all seen it. And if we continue, we're probably going to make a lot of difference. We are going to make a lot of difference. And there's a lot of hope and strength in our group, in our movement. It's just beautiful, and I love being at the camp.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how the day-to-day works? Yeah. What happens?
Well, every day we have, overnight, a few people, we have a rota, and a few people stay overnight, at least 4 people at any one time overnight, so the camp is never unattended. In the morning, a few people who are overnight probably go home or settle down to have some sleep in a tent, and somebody prepares food and we have a big communal meal. There's tea and coffee throughout the day, and people walk by and we talk to them. We have a library of donated books, so if you want to have a read, just relax for a bit in the tent, go ahead. And a couple of times a week, it used to be every day, we had a general assembly where we sit around in a circle and we discuss all the matters that need discussing, camp-related things and things related to our branch of the movement and that kind of thing. But most of our energy and focus is on speaking to the public and engaging with them and discussing the issues with them and seeing what they think. Because everyone's voice is equally valid and everyone's voice is equally loud. Anyone can come down to a general assembly and have exactly the same input as anybody else there. It is the true democracy in action.
Sounds great. I find it intriguing that the media and the press can't label Occupy. And one minute they're saying they actually haven't got any leaders, or they don't really know what they're doing. And the next minute your brand is anti-capitalist. Now I think that's really successful. They can't label. And I think it's the most important thing at the moment.
Yeah, the press really amused me, because right at the start, when it started on the 17th of September, until quite a long time after, everyone except Al Jazeera and Russia Today were point blank refusing to even acknowledge the movement's existence in the press. There was no reporting at all, complete media blackout, and the only information you could get hold of about it was online and through the independent sources. And bizarrely Russia Today. Why them? And basically, the thing is, we're threatening the very people who own the media. You've got Rupert Murdoch, he's part of the 1%, he's got a major influence. You can't deny Murdoch's influence through the newspapers and the TV stations and everything else that he, through News International, owns. So we're threatening him. And because the media are all biased towards the corporate leaders that pay their bills, they don't want anything to threaten the people who are paying their bills and keeping them staying in control of them. So that's why the media are afraid to label us, because they don't want to say anything that they might need to retract later if they find another way to try and get their claws in and try and rip us apart and break public support for us. That's their goal, to try and break public support.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think that's on the one hand they kind of want to diminish the movement as something that isn't really happening, so they say, oh well, it's got no leadership, so therefore it's got no legs. But on the other hand, they want to be able to say, oh well, people aren't just spontaneously doing this at their own accord, there's somebody like leading them into it.
I think one of our biggest strengths is the fact that we have no leader. Because we're opposing such powerful players, and whistleblowers from all kinds of different sectors have pointed out to us that these people do get people assassinated. If we had a leader, that person would get a bullet through their brain in seconds, I'm sure of it. So part of the fact that that is one of the good reasons for not having a leader. The other thing is that part of our movement is the fact that we are all equal, and we want to forge a society that is totally equal, which means that we cannot have an outright leader or a hierarchical structure, because you've got to lead how you need to, first start how you need to go on, lead by example. So we can't have a leader, and we don't want a leader. Everything is decided by consensus.
I'm going to go back to John's question about practical things. They are city square, it must be very uncomfortable sleeping on top of concrete. How do you get a good night's sleep? How do you get to the toilet or get a wash or cook your food or get a hot drink? How does all that work? How do you get electrical power or get your phones charged or your portable gadget? How do you do that? How do you get your Wi-Fi going? I'm just interested in these practical conditions, because you must be spending a lot of time talking about that.
We've got it all
what sort of grub you eat? Give us a menu.
Well,
the occupation menu.
Okay,
Get
so in
Jamie
order of kind of importance to bodily functions, shall we?
Yeah, let's go.
Right, toilet facilities, we go across the road to Wetherspoons because we're not a big enough occupation for anyone to have donated a bottle into it.
So you just nip
Or
over
just
to
nip
the...
across the road. Yeah, Wetherspoons is shut, we go
You have
to
to
the
pay
train
to go to the
station toilet.
station, don't you?
Yeah, well, the station, our toilets are open all night, so, when we can't use other
When Wetherspoons
facilities.
is shut, we go to the main train station toilet.
Do you have to jump over the barrier? 'Cause
Yeah.
I don't.
Well, no, it's open all
Oh,
night.
good.
You have to pay 30p, but there's worse things at 4 o'clock in the morning.
True.
You pay 30p to get to the loo.
So that's kind of our toilet facility,
Good, yeah.
Wetherspoons pub, and they tolerate our presence. We haven't overtly told them, but it's kind of obvious that they know. And from time to time, some of us do go there for a drink.
And also, I was going to say, we do.
We provide them
It's
with
a nice
bit.
warm place to go and have a cup of hot chocolate
Warm up
sometimes,
Yeah.
So we are amongst the customers, So.
Yes. As far as food and drink is concerned, people have donated quite a lot of food, so that's what we use, that's what we eat. And people have also chosen to donate money to support our movement. So if we don't have something that we need, we discuss it and at GA and decide, shall we spend camp funds on this? And if we reach consensus, then we go ahead and do that.
What sort of food you eat? Just out of interest, it colours it up.
In order to not have to prepare several meals for one meal, we try to keep meals vegetarian or vegan so that everyone can eat no matter what their dietary needs. But people have donated meat, so sometimes we make 2 meals.
Yeah. So how do you cook all this?
People have donated gas canisters and camping stoves.
And you've got the gas, you're all right for fuel. I did see something on your Facebook saying that you couldn't use the butane because it froze.
Yeah.
The blue one.
I don't think it's frozen yet.
No, it hasn't, but there's a possibility that it might.
I
But
didn't
at the
know that.
moment it's
Really?
still useful and we're still using it,
Good.
which is good because we've got a few canisters of it. And we've also got little spray cans of, well, they look a bit like spray cans of fuel.
The little backup.
Yeah, the little backup cans.
Yeah.
So that's how we prepare food. And in terms of hot water, we have 2 choices. The church near the town hall have generously allowed us to use their facilities
That's
as
good.
much as we want. So we go up there, we can fill a load of flasks. We have quite a few big thermos flasks that people have lent or donated. So we just fill them up and bring them back. We can also refill bottles for cold water out there. Or we can use a kettle and, boil some water on the stove. So we're all right in terms of hot water, which is great because in this cold weather we practically live off of tea and
Got any
coffee.
favourite menus at all?
Huh?
Got any favourite menus you do?
Well, I think, there's a lot of sort of soups and
Soups,
things that are made up
pastas,
quickly,
easy
easily,
things.
pastas.
Because cooking means that 1 or 2 people have got to sort of stop engaging with people and stop chatting outside the tent and go inside and just ignore everybody else to cook. And in terms of washing up, we try to make sure that everyone washes up their own plates and stuff.
How do they do that?
You can't.
Well,
So simple.
we do actually have like a kind of like a sink unit.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
have a big
And
unit.
it's one of the things that has absolutely kind of warmed my heart is the way that even though on the rather trivial presentation that the BBC did on the politics show the other day, and Mike McCarthy says, oh well, there's 17 people down there, and what 17 people are going to do, and stuff like that. But actually the thing is, this whole
Different
operation,
17 people every day.
right, exactly, and the whole operation
Only 2 or 3
couldn't
people over
sustain itself if there weren't dozens of people providing backup
Yeah.
support, people donating money,
At the
people
time,
bringing
yeah.
hot water, people say just passing by, just giving us. We just get lots and lots of donations of food. Just on a daily basis, people come up, give us piles of cakes, hot rolls, stuff like this. It's just an endless stream. So it is far more.
But I just remember that woman.
So it's not good for the waistline then, is it? Being
I'm
Not
actually
really.
put on weight.
Oh, do you remember that woman that brought the vegan chocolate and pear cake?
Oh, that was
That
awesome.
was gorgeous.
A what? A vegan chocolate. This is
Sounds like a cricket commentary.
a vegan chocolate haircut.
It was a chocolate cake made with pear as well. And it was
Fantastic.
vegan. And I'd never actually had a vegan chocolate cake before, so, before I didn't actually think vegans had good chocolate. So when I tried this, it was a complete revelation. Wow, it was gorgeous.
But I mean, I think this is all indicative of the fact that there is, even though so many people can't physically be there with us, that the evidence of the support. If we were in some way going against the public zeitgeist, we would have crumbled by about day 3.
Oh, yeah.
But we have a constant stream. It's like
You
it's
sit
kind of.
around at the camp for any given 4 or 5 hours during the day and somebody will give us food. At least once.
And they all say, we really appreciate, we really value what you're doing, we're behind you, and we kind of wish we could be with you, but we really want you to achieve your goals because you are speaking for us.
Yeah.
So there's a public current against the system which is feeding you in morale and
Yeah.
competence.
The best explanation of it that I've seen is this video that I saw on YouTube where this guy explained it as an iceberg. Us, this is the Occupy movement, is just the tip of the iceberg that you can see over the waterline. And beneath it is a lot of people that support us and drop by maybe for a few hours or don't even have time to do that, but
It's a good analogy.
are there with us and behind us. And without them, we just couldn't cope.
That's right. I mean, when people see us and they say, oh, well, you're so small, but we wouldn't be there if we didn't have an extended network of people pushing up underneath, people going.
We've got that many groups that support us as well. I mean, we've got the Socialist Party behind us, we've got the unions behind us, we've got UK Uncut behind us, we've got organisations that are affiliating themselves with us and saying, we support this movement.
And the fact the council hasn't tried to check you out.
Definitely do.
No, the council have been by a few times, and apparently, I wasn't there the last time they came by because I had to go and do something. But apparently, what they said was that that Leeds City Square was cleaner with us then before we showed up.
You could ask them publicly for a green recycle bin.
That
I
was
think
about
that I'm not close in on this particular one, but I think that arrangements have been made about certainly they're extremely cooperative about helping us deal with rubbish.
Ask them for a recycle bin.
And the police as well.
the police have
Have
been
been
nice.
absolutely amazing, at least the local police.
The local police have been fantastic. They drop by a couple of times a day and ask
Have
how
a cup
we
of
are.
coffee.
And a few days ago, right, the EDL showed up. Before anyone had had time to phone the police to come and help us, the police were already there. Because we're
Could
on
you tell
about
us something about the
12 cameras.
incidents? When did that happen?
I
It
was,
was Friday or something.
yeah,
Was it
This
the day
Friday.
of the football?
It probably was.
it was, yeah. The EDL showed up,
How
and
many?
because we're absolutely surrounded by by CCTV cameras, and of course the police are keeping an eye on us in case they can find an excuse to kick us off or whatever. They saw the EDL coming in and starting to try and tear a tent down, and before anyone had had time to dial 999, there they were.
Could you tell me how you knew they were EDL? Were they sporting badges or emblems?
I was speaking at another event at the time.
I understand that they made it easy to identify themselves.
No, I wasn't. I was just
In
replaying
terms
the
of
night. I
either,
was watching.
maybe badges or just saying it. I mean, I wasn't there, but
Yeah, I wasn't there because I was at replaying the night.
Yeah.
So.
But the people who were there, said it was quite easy. It was,
Yeah.
they made their identification
Leeds were at home.
quickly.
What time did it happen?
I'm not sure, it must have been about 7
It
o'clock.
was sometime between about 7 and 9,
So they'll be uncomfortable again.
5 and 9, something like that, I don't know. I wasn't there, but I heard about it the moment I got back.
And also, I mean, one of the things is that it's quite a kind of learning opportunity to learn how to deal with unusual situations. I mean, one chap said to me a few days ago that he learned more social skills in dealing with unfamiliar people and strangers in this was a couple of weeks ago. So within a couple of weeks of being there, he felt like he had just upped his social skills and gained in his ability to deal with unfamiliar situations because
Constantly interacting with people that you'd never have met before, already
you
in circumstances.
not like you might otherwise stay at home watching TV, or else you're out there meeting people, and that's what kind of that's why what humans do. The world that a lot of people live in is very artificial, and this is.
It's not face to face, is it?
No, I mean, like Mike the Carpet said the other day. Well, he didn't approve of what we were doing, although it is.
What was that guy's name?
Did you see it?
Oh, I don't
They were so patronising. You can still stream it on BBC's iPlayer, but they were so patronising.
Trevor, what was this?
BBC Politics show.
Oh, right.
Mike's Carpet.
Last Sunday.
From Arley,
last Sunday,
originally.
11:30. So, Claire, are you
Yes.
going to...
Okay, righto. Well, what I was going to talk about was kind of perhaps a little bit more, theoretical. Obviously, Gay has given us an introduction as to how we came across the Occupy movement, and Rhiannon has gone into more detail about her own engagement, and my engagement with the Occupy movement is pretty much very, very similar to Rhiannon, so I don't need to repeat anything. I just heard it coming up, and then I knew it was coming up, and then it was coming up, and I was just there because I just have a feeling that, which I think, in a broad sense, is reflected by a lot of people. I mean, I was perhaps more focused, and particularly about what I felt was going on here. But there is certainly, I feel, a very broad, widespread feeling in society, not just in Britain, but around the world, obviously in America, in all these different countries where occupations have taken place, that there is something profoundly wrong going on. And you just start out with this feeling. And I mean, I come from the background of being an art therapist, working in mental health, and I'm interested in this from like an ethical point of view. I'm interested in it from the point of view of evolutionary psychology, which might be a little bit, you might seem a little bit out there and weird and vague to some people. But what it means is that, it put in layman's terms, and that this kind of connects with this feeling of something's wrong, is that the system, that the society that we have at the moment, is not providing, it's not serving the needs of the majority of people. It's a system which has been geared over a very long period of time to work to benefit a very small number of people. I kind of, in many ways, see what we have at the moment veering very rapidly back to a kind of medieval feudalism. Because in the feudal world, you were owned by your lord, or at least you owned him, service, and you might have your own fields, but you'd have to pay tithage on them, and you'd have to be called, you owed service to the lord, he could call you up for military service, all this kind of thing. And the debt burden that people are getting into at the moment is kind of putting people in that similar situation where they are beholden on a lifelong basis. I mean, people, by the time they're 25, if people have had an education, they could be 25 or 30,000 pounds in debt. To me, this is incredible. I went to university in the 1970s. I got a full grant and my fees were paid for me, and this is what happened to most people. It was not considered tremendously unusual. It was acknowledged to be a privilege, but if we think about the economic situation of the country in the 1970s, everybody used to say Britain was a basket case, but Britain could afford to pay for education. Now, obviously, there are issues like labour is massively overextended tertiary education. But that's sort of a bit of a distraction, I think, because we find that, certainly up to the time of the financial crisis, there was a massive increase in education. They were already saying what a successful country Britain was, and yet all this student debt, it was all started well before the financial crisis. To simply say that this student debt as a result of the financial crisis is completely stepping aside of the issue. People, basically, I can't imagine, if I got into £25,000 or £30,000 worth of debt, well, basically it's lifelong debt. It's lifelong servitude, it is debt servitude, it is slavery. And this is, what I want to get into is I want to try and deconstruct some of the assumptions and social paradigms that are built into the way people see the world at the moment, because that's back to this evolutionary thing whereby we are kind of told that this is the way that it has to be, and there is no other way. But it is not the case. It is this way because the financial system largely has been set up in this particular way. And we all kind of know that the government is in the pockets, is in bed with the financial and corporate system. I mean, it's not, now isn't the place to go into the detail of this. We all know about the Murdoch corruption scandal. We all know that Cameron and all his cronies have had meetings with Murdoch, and they're all kind of disassociating themselves from him now that he's been so discredited. But the fact is, we all know they were buddy-buddy. Murdoch, of course, is the media kingmaker, and has been so for several decades now. I remember in the late 70s when he was first in his ascendancy. And then another example I'll just throw out. Of course, we've probably all heard about the £8 billion that Vodafone were apparently just allowed. It wasn't even the case that they avoided it or evaded it through some technicality. They were let off £8 billion because the government said, well, if we try to ask Vodafone for our rightful tax, they will leave the country. To which my response is, well, let them leave the country. Somebody else will take up their phone market. This country is not going to turn into a technical wilderness because one company leads. I think that going back to the ethical position that I come from on this, it seems to me absolutely morally intolerable that a government should say, oh, we're afraid to ask this company for £8 billion, and yet they're prepared to take it from people in their pensions, they're prepared to take it from people in wage cuts, they're prepared to take it from people in terms of health service reduction, selling off the National Health Service, which belongs to us. So what they're doing is, basically, they're doing things which are moral cowardice, to say, oh, we can't ask Vodafone for that £8 billion, we'd rather impoverish our old age pensions. That is, to me, absolutely pathetic. But, well, of course, the reason behind it is, I don't have the facts and the figures, but we all kind of have to come to the conclusion that there's more to it than just saying, well, Vodafone, clearly, there is a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. Because if the British government, this is the British government that goes to war at the drop of a hat, and yet it's afraid to ask. Well, it just doesn't kind of wash. But I'd like to go into a little bit about the way the financial system works, because this kind of gives a little bit of background about some of the ways that the policy is made. Because one of the things that I keep coming across on the internet that I didn't understand until quite recently is about fractional reserve banking. Now, I don't know if everybody or anybody here, I see one person smiling over there at the thought of fractional reserve banking. It may be a novel idea to some people. What is fractional reserve banking? The world banking system is based on what is called fractional reserve system. What it allows is that banks are allowed to lend money. Okay, well this is a fairly simple concept, and you know, people have to borrow money, and that's okay. But these banks, such as the Federal Reserve Bank or the Bank of England, are not even actually owned lock, stock and barrel by the government. They are not government agencies. Now this is something that is, again, there's a whole level of obfuscation and avoidance around these issues. The Federal Reserve is quite a clear case that a lot of people are waking up to. And I'm talking about these things as it's a global issue. Obviously we have to think about local British issues, the United Kingdom issues, but also these questions are endemic throughout the world. The Federal Reserve is a clear example. I actually saw a brief clip of an interview with Alan Greenspan recently. Of course, he's recently been, I think, replaced by Ben Bernanke, but for many years, Alan Greenspan was the head of the Federal Reserve. And he quite candidly said on camera that the Federal Reserve is not a department of the American government. It is not overseen by any department of the American government. The American government has no absolute jurisdiction over it. The American government borrows money from the Federal Reserve and has to pay interest on that money. So when you actually absorb that information, you realise that the world financial system is actually run by private banks whose main purpose is to make profit. The Bank of England is slightly more obscure, and so probably, in a way, possibly even more suspicious. It was set up in the time of King William III, William of Orange, in the 1680, about 1690 perhaps. Private investors, of which the king at the time put in £10,000, I think it was, as a chief investor, but basically the investors all invested money, and it was a private bank until 1947, when Prime Minister Clement Attlee, under the truly amazing post-war Labour government, nationalised it. I think it was 1947. However, even while it was nationalised, and Gordon Brown, of course, in 1997, 50 years later, made it an independent, gave it independent policy authority. But even during that time, and now, it's even when it was technically nationalised, it was exempt from disclosing who the investors are. Because obviously, it's been a private bank for 250 years or something, and all that time, private investors, obviously the money has to come from somewhere, or, originally, and these private investors obviously have a big amount, and they take off the money. And it's still the same case. They actually have, I think it's the bank, I think they're called the Bank of England nominees, BOEN. They are legally exempt from having their names made in public as to who it is. So basically, you still have a situation in this country where the Bank of England is providing money to the government and asking for interest on it. So we are paying interest to these undisclosed nominees of the Bank of England, of whom it's sort of fairly well known. The Rothschilds are one of the major ones, if not the major one. So to get back to the fractional reserve system, you have, say, £1 million, and on the basis of this, banks are actually allowed to loan 10 £1 million loans. And this is a complex system that goes back to the Italian Renaissance when this was invented. And you may recall It's a Wonderful Life, that film with James Stewart that was made in the late 1930s. The idea of the fractional reserve is that theoretically people assume that there will never be a run on the bank like James Stewart, saying, you know, I haven't got the money, I can't pay everybody back their physical cash, but if you trust me, if you trust the bank, you know, we are investing the money, and we can't just give it back to you, but in due course, you know, in dribs and drabs, you can all reclaim your money. And this is the basis behind the fractional reserve banking, so that nobody actually, not everybody at the same time, all asked for their money back because they simply couldn't give it. But at the same time, the more obscure part of it is that everybody's paying interest on their loan. So, you pay your interest on your loan, and the bank is then able to lend 10 times the amount of interest that you have paid them, because that's the way fractional reserve banking goes. So their pot of money gets ever larger. Money is actually created out of thin air. This is something that people find really hard to understand. It is not based on gold reserves. It might originally have been based on gold reserves, but the whole system has now become so overextended that it bears no resemblance to gold reserves. And even if it did, Gordon Brown sold most of our gold reserves in 2003. And he sold them cheap. They're probably worth, you know, several times the value.
They're always cheap by a later date.
Of course, because
if
gold
you,
never goes
on
out.
the other hand, if you don't sell them, you can't use them. No use at all.
But the idea is that you could, really there's a movement now throughout the world that governments should issue their own currencies based on the gold reserves.
That's what we did in 1926. We went back on the... Was it 26? We went back on the gold
That was
reserve.
Churchill, and it caused the Second World War.
Yeah. But anyway, it's quite a complex issue. I mean, I'm not saying that we should necessarily go back to the gold standard, but I'm trying to point out the flaw in the fractional reserve system, which basically sucks money up through the interest and also creates this money out of thin air, so that the people at the top, these anonymous Bank of England nominees, the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve for a century, the Bank of England for 2.5 centuries, has basically been hoovering up money from the population through the interest and creating this ever larger balloon of what we call fiat money, which is made out of the interest. It's just
Fictional capital.
Sorry?
Fictional capital.
Fictional capital. So, what the result? While in practical terms, this sort of kind of works in the early stages. You can say, well, you know, it's sort of, you know, as long as you don't have a wonderful life run on the bank can always keep, you know, producing this money, people borrow it, blah, 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 blah. That's all right. But when you look at the ethical consequences of it, it means that we have these banking houses, and you have things like the European Central Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, are all based on this, and they're all essentially private banks. And so, what's happened with Greece and Italy, for instance? Now, they've got their own problems and such like, but basically what's happened is that private banks have taken over the government, obviously, private banks have taken over the government of Greece, using the European community as the proxy, the puppet, to do their will. So we now have a situation in the world where these anonymously owned banks are basically dictating policy to the entire world. Most of the money that they have is actually this fictional debt-created interest capital that they have accrued over generations or even centuries. And so you come to a point where the world is actually being controlled by these people. It's actually far less than 1%. And since they have all the money, they actually run the show. One of the things that is rarely talked about with the present crisis, but which is actually the bottom line, is the fact that the planetary ecosystem is being destroyed. And it's being destroyed by the corporations, it's being destroyed by the money-creating machine, which is only interested in creating money, which is behind the corporations, which motivates pulls the strings on the governments who are afraid to try and rein them in or are simply bought and sold by them. If you're in any doubt about the existence of these shadowy elites, I'd like to quote Dennis Healey, who, as the older members here will know, was...
Leeds.
Sorry?
He's Leeds MP.
Leeds MP, indeed. I was actually listed in his constituency at one point. And he was Defence Secretary under Harold Wilson in the 1960s, and in the 1970s he was both Chancellor and Foreign Secretary. So Dennis Healey is a fairly sort of mainstream politician who's held high office for quite a number of years, and he has been a member of the shadowy and infamous Bilderberg group. Now, people like to say, oh yeah, the Bilderbergs, they're just kind of like that's just a conspiracy theory. But let's deal with some conspiracy facts.
What did he say?
Right, I will tell you what he said. I'll just detail people such as Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands was involved in setting up this group in the 1950s, and he was an ex-SS officer in the 1940s war. And Henry Kissinger, big figure from American politics over the last 40 years, he's a regular attender of the Bilderberg group. Now, what Dennis Healey said about the Bilderberg group was that, yes, it exists. It exists, he doesn't deny that it exists, he doesn't deny that he was involved with it. And when the interviewer said to him, well, what's it about and why does it exist? And why is it so secret? He said, it's not secret. He said, it's just private. Which, there's a fine distinction between those two words. When you're talking about the people who go there being the most influential and powerful politicians and money magnates on the planet. So when the interviewer pressed him a little bit further on this and said, well, why does it need to be secret? Why can't we have these debates in public? And why aren't they accountable? And why don't people know what's going on? Why don't people have mandated envoys from governments to negotiate these things at international conferences, as one would imagine that these things should be? He said, simply, this is the way it has always been done. Now that, to me, sums up the entire picture that we're dealing with at the moment. This is the way that it has always been done. In other words, the people with the power get together behind the scenes and they decide what is going to happen. Now, this is not conspiracy theory, this is conspiracy fact. I saw this on an interview with Dennis Healey about 7 years ago on the BBC, I think it was, it might have been Channel 4 possibly, but it has been broadcast widely. So I just want to, probably better wind up at that point, just to say that this is the kind of thing that in the Occupy movement we want to first expose. We feel it's very important for people to talk about these things which are not discussed. Things like that, they are the basis of the very world that we live in. It's the underlying foundation and it's the cause of what's happening at the moment. And yet, it is not talked about on the mainstream media. It is not talked about on the mainstream media because these people have their strings pulled by these kind of people. And if people truly understood the nature of this, as J. Edgar Hoover said, the population, J. Edgar Hoover, in case people don't know who J. Edgar Hoover was, J. Edgar Hoover was the first director of the FBI, and he was director of the FBI for 37 years, from the days of Al Capone to Richard Nixon. So he was pretty well in with knowing what was going on behind the scenes in America. And he said, the population is left powerless in the face of a conspiracy beyond their wildest imagination, or something very similar to that. So when people dismiss this kind of thing as mere conspiracy theories, you only have to look at the hard evidence to see that these things are going on, there is evidence, there are these groups of people, there may be other groups, secrecy, you know, people like secrets, people like to do things privately, secretly, whatever. And until these things are accountable, until the truth is known about these things, and until they are accountable to the population for their shenanigans and behind-the-scene dealings, we will not have a truly open democratic society. So this is what, in my mind, Occupy Leeds and the worldwide occupation movement is about. Okay, so thank you very much, and I'm sorry I went on for such length.
Any questions from anybody about any of these things that have been mentioned from one speaker?
I wanted to explore this.
I just want to check the timing on the video.
I wanted to explore the financial side of things.
Okay.
I have most months a meeting booked in here for any current interesting topic that kicks up. We had one about Palestine, we had another one about Israel's nuclear weapons alongside the CND. We had a couple of meetings of Headingley against the cuts in run up to the big march on the 26th of March. We've had another couple of meetings on other topics. There's 12 meetings here a year, but we don't always get a meeting in. I was down at the Occupation chatting away, ran into Gay, and ran into a few other people, and I said, I'll put on a meeting for you. And I want to keep it as informal as possible. We've got two people, Rhiannon, whose surname I don't know, and Gay Bennett, who's lived in Headingley for years, who's visited more than one of the occupations in the country. And just to show you the scope of what's happening, there was a meeting down at the Cervantes Centre just last week, which is the Spanish language school.
To ask about the Occupy movement, because she was organising a debate on the Occupy with Todmorden U3A, that's the University of the Third Age, and she'd been sort of commissioned to come over and make inquiries, and she wanted me to answer one or two questions. The first question was, why are you called anti-capitalists? So I said, well, perhaps we aren't always called anti-capitalists, and perhaps people wouldn't wish to be anti-things so much as in favour of positive things. We got over that little hump, and we then went on to a sort of discussion of some of the things she was particularly interested in. And I later had a long email from her about how the discussion had gone in her World Affairs meeting on that Wednesday, which was smaller than usual because of the strike. But people had debated a whole lot of topics, and I might just refer quickly to some of the things which particularly interested.
And they had a meeting on the, I can't pronounce, Indignados, which when my wife went there, she came back and told me about it, and they had someone from the Greek movement as well. And it seemed to be similar to what's happening in this country. All very similar. It's not just a UK current or a Spanish or a Greek current, it's an American current. It seems to be all over the place. I was watching a dance of the tents on YouTube as I left my house. This was, they've been told to move on, so they all appeared having cut the tops of the tents off with holes at the bottom and were wearing like skirts, dancing in ballet formation around this park in Melbourne, with the police trying to figure out, are they camping, are they camping, are they dancing, what on earth is going on? I was watching this, it was hilarious. And then they were all running around with their arms out like this and pirouetting. It was hilarious. I thought, unbelievable. And YouTube, which is what Claire is doing, is an excellent medium for watching anything. So I just emailed my friend about how to make a cider press out of a carjack.
It had its problems, and in fact all encampments have their own problems, which we might talk about a little later. I went to Nottingham, one of the most flourishing ones going. I went to Sheffield, that's a good one, and I also went to Bradford before it was sort of swept away by council edict. And then not long after that, on the 11th of November, we started with Leeds Occupy, which was a great pleasure to me. The interesting thing about the camps, I find, and staying in the camps and going down there and chatting to people, is you meet so many different kinds of people. And I had quite an interesting time about 10 days ago. I was sitting in the tea tent with the cooking and the office and the various lounge chairs, which are sort of decrepit kitchen chairs and garden chairs. And somebody arrived, and she'd come over from Todmorden.
And there's about 20 ways of doing it on YouTube. But for us, and what we're interested in, there's plenty of scope for that. Now, I don't know which order you two would like to talk.
I'll start.
So Gay's going to start.
Because we've got all generations here. And my name is Gay, this is Claire, and this is Rhiannon. And I'll just kick off with a few comments. It is certainly true that I have visited some other places in Leeds. I was not long after it all started at St Paul's. I didn't go there to camp. I walked into a nearby youth hostel and I visited St Paul's and nearby Finsbury Square, and I went with a group of them to Canary Wharf, where we were lectured by two bankers, and there were many activities going on at St Paul's, and I took part in those throughout the day I was there, and it really was quite interesting. Anyway, as soon as I got back to Leeds, nothing much was happening here, so I thought I would visit one or two other places. And I went down to Birmingham,